Welcome to Workplace Psychology with Dr. Martha Greidick. I'm Dr. Martha Greidick. This podcast examines a wide variety of work-related issues through the lens of industrial and organizational psychology. And while many of the topics discussed here may be seen as intended for white-collar employees and their employers, in reality, the ideas presented here are applicable across organizations and industries. Additionally, many of the topics discussed here may be applicable outside of the workplace. I encourage you to examine what's presented here, apply what makes sense to you, and simply discard the rest. Although burnout is not a new topic of conversation, it's one that continues to dominate the airwaves, so to speak. There's a good reason for that. It's because burnout continues to be a part of our reality, and it's something that hasn't really been addressed in such a way that would make it go away. Many people understand some of the basics that are associated with burnout, the symptoms, the things that clue us in terms of the state of burnout and what burnout is. Some common signs of burnout may include things such as increased fatigue, or perhaps being bored or feeling unchallenged at work. Health issues have also been associated with burnout, and this is one of those signs or symptoms that many people recognize as being a potential part of the state of burnout. Someone experiencing burnout may also have issues related to sleep. They may be unable to concentrate or focus. Others may become more cynical in regards to their work, maybe in terms of the work that they do or the work experience that they have. But there are other symptoms or other things or signs that are associated with burnout that may not be so readily recognized as something that is related to burnout. And it's important to understand those because that's what will help us to recognize burnout, which will then allow us to address it properly. Some of the less common signs or symptoms associated with burnout are things such as self-medicating, and this could have different meanings for different people. Self-medicating could be something like overeating, so we can self-medicate with food, or perhaps alcohol or drugs, be that prescription drugs or over-the-counter drugs or street drugs. So self-medicating can be an important sign that is related to burnout. A person who's experiencing burnout may also feel a sense of resentment. That resentment may be towards their employer or maybe their coworkers or even their customers or clients. So it's important to remember that feeling resentful while at work especially may be a sign of burnout. Another sign of burnout may be the feeling of your efforts being useless. So the work that you do, the efforts that you put in while you're at work may seem like they're useless and they don't really accomplish anything. This is something that may not be so readily or quickly associated with burnout because it could also be associated with other things. But it's important that those are signs that could very well be an indicator of burnout. If you no longer take your breaks or take your lunch break, that could also be a sign of burnout. Skipping your breaks can have so many reasons for it, but if you do it on a consistent, regular basis, it's important to consider that as a possible sign or symptom of being in the state of burnout. So make sure you're paying attention to that. Everybody needs to take a break every day on a regular basis. So if you're at a point where you are purposely skipping your breaks, stop and consider why you may be doing that. Are you more absent from work than you used to be? maybe you call in sick more often, or maybe you show up late or leave early. If you're simply avoiding being at work at really any cost that you can come up with, any cost necessary, then that may very well be another sign or symptom of burnout. Everybody thinks about having a different job or maybe a different career every now and then. But if those are thoughts that seem to dominate your waking hours, or at least the time when you're at work, that's something to consider as a possible sign of burnout. If when you're at work, your mind keeps drifting to a fantasy of being somewhere else, working somewhere else, or having a different career, there may be a bigger reason for that than the everyday stresses that you may encounter that seem to be manageable. You may be actually experiencing burnout. So that's something else to consider. It's important to remember that burnout isn't limited to your time at work. So while burnout and being in the state of burnout may have originated or may have been caused by work-related situations or a situation, it's not something that stays at work while you punch out and go home. It tends to spill into your non-work domains, meaning into your personal life. So this is something that's important for you to consider. If you're feeling symptoms of burnout, signs of burnout, maybe the obvious and common ones or the ones that are less obvious and less common perhaps, make sure you're paying attention to how those signs or symptoms affect the rest of your life outside of the workplace. Because again, burnout does not contain itself within your office walls. Burnout is something that affects your entire life, regardless of where its origins or its roots lie. So how do we address burnout? There are many things out there that discuss these topics, from videos to books to posts to blogs. Well, the first thing that we need to remember is that we need to recognize burnout for what it is. Oftentimes it's so easy to dismiss it as just being tired, or just feeling a little bit under the weather, or just being a little more stressed out than usual. But burnout is something that doesn't happen overnight, and it's cumulative in the sense that it comes on gradually over time. And before you know it, you may be in a state of burnout and not even realize it. So it's very important to first and foremost recognize whether or not you are in a state of burnout, which is why I'm going over some of the common and less common symptoms that are associated with burnout, or signs that are associated with burnout. So before you can take any action to make things better to help yourself out, first you have to recognize whether you are in a state of burnout. It may be time to step back and take a break. Sometimes when we're in the thick of it, it's difficult to recognize a situation for what it is. But taking a break, zooming out, and evaluating the situation as a whole in its entirety may be just what you need in order to be able to recognize the situation for what it is. And if it's burnout, then it's burnout. You may want to take a break, such as taking a few days off. Now, some people think that taking some time off may be the only thing that you need in order to properly address burnout. But that's just the beginning. That's just one of the few steps, or one of the first steps that we need to take in order to deal with burnout. So once you recognize that you may indeed be in a state of burnout, it's time to take a break. Take some time off and evaluate the situation, because only by understanding what the situation is can you look for the root causes of the situation. When we look for the root cause or causes of a situation, that's what allows us to address those root causes or root cause of whatever the situation may be, in this case, burnout. we're not looking for a band-aid type of fix. And taking a vacation and coming back to the same type of environment and the same kind of situation would be a band-aid type of fix, which is very short-lived, very temporary. So while taking time off is helpful, it's only one of the things that we need to do in order to properly address burnout. So take some time off, take a break, assess the situation, and look for the root causes. Now, sometimes it can feel overwhelming when we talk about burnout, and it can seem as though you may need to do something drastic in terms of change in order to help you get out of that state of burnout and not perpetuate it. But you may not need to do something drastic like quit or change your jobs, because chances are there's more to it than just the job. For many people, that is the actual situation where it's not just the job. There are more things that come into play, and changing jobs will not fix the issue long term. Before you know it, you'll feel burnt out in your new job. So this is why it's so important to really closely examine what is the root cause or root causes of what has led up to you feeling like you're burnt out, to being in that state of burnout. It's by addressing the root cause that we can help ourselves to not repeat the patterns that will lead us right back into that same state of burnout. And I strongly suggest that this is something where you may want to consider seeing a therapist or another healthcare professional, because when we are in the thick of everything, in the middle of our life and our work and everything that's happening and all the things that have led up to burnout, it can be difficult to be objective. It can be difficult to identify things for what they are, and it can be difficult to change patterns. But when you have an outside influence or an outside person contributing to your work, working towards getting out of burnout and staying out of burnout, this is where a third party, an impartial party, a professional, hopefully, preferably a professional, can come in very handy and very helpful. So I strongly suggest you consider seeing someone outside of work, a therapist, another healthcare professional, a counselor of some sort, someone who could help you to work through what is happening with your situation, what the root cause or causes are of your burnout, and how you can address those root causes so that you can change the pattern and not end up in the state of burnout again in the future. As this episode comes to an end, let's review what was discussed. Burnout is not a new topic of conversation, but is one that continues to be at the forefront of our conversations. It's important to remember that while there are some common ideas, common signs that are quickly and readily associated with burnout, there are some other signs that may not be so obvious, that may not be so readily associated with burnout. It's important to recognize both, because only by recognizing what is happening with symptoms or signs that may potentially be associated with burnout can you determine whether or not you yourself are in a state of burnout. Once you can recognize that, you can then look for the root cause or root causes of your burnout and address those causes so that you don't repeat those patterns that have led you to burnout to begin with. This is where help from another person, such as a therapist or a healthcare professional of some sort, may be helpful. As the week unfolds, I invite you to examine your own situation. Are you potentially feeling burnt out? Are you in a state of burnout? For many of you, the answer will be no, and that's great. But don't dismiss the idea of examining your own situation to see whether you are potentially heading in the direction of feeling burnt out. The best time to address it would be before you actually feel burnt out. Stopping those root causes, changing your situation in such a way that you never actually become burnt out. If you're already in the state of burnout, The work is similar in that you have to recognize it, you have to look for those root causes, and then you have to do the work to change whatever needs to be changed so that you can get out of that state of burnout and not repeat the same patterns that got you there to begin with. This is something where you have to be proactive. Look at your own situation and then do the work that is necessary. Chances are, if there is an issue, it's not going to fix itself. For those of you who experience this podcast in an audio-only version, I invite you to check out my YouTube channel where you can find this podcast in a video version. In addition to the video version of the podcast, my YouTube channel also contains videos that address stress management. The link for my YouTube channel is in the description below, so I invite you to check that out. Thank you for joining me today. Please subscribe to this podcast. I look forward to seeing you here again next time. Until then, I wish you joy and well-being.